Our current housing market has made the decision of whether to rent or buy a place to call home much more difficult. It's kind of a crazy market with the recent run-up in home values, high interest rates, low inventory, and people getting into bidding wars. This video will take an in-depth look at the rent versus buy dilemma and give you the tools to make an informed decision about whether home ownership is a smart investment in today's market. I know how most people frame the issue. They say something like, why would I want to continue throwing money away on rent when those payments could be going towards something I'll own? And I understand that feeling. But not much analysis goes into that thought. Usually, people just compare the amount of the mortgage to the rent for a comparable place. But that's far too simplistic and tells you little about whether a home is a good investment. So let's do an honest assessment and run the numbers. Let's use a home price of $400,000, which is just slightly under the median home price today, and assume somebody has $40,000 to put towards a down payment. That's only a 10% down payment. In the second quarter of 2023, the average down payment was 14.4%. We won't finance the closing costs either. You don't want to be paying interest on that for 30 years. According to Bankrate, the average closing cost for the buyer is between 2 and 5%. We'll go with the bottom of this range and use 2%, which is still an additional $8,000 over and above the down payment. So this purchase requires a total of $48,000 in upfront money. $40,000 towards the purchase price of the house and $8,000 in just pure unrecoverable expense. So the buyer needs to finance $360,000. As I make this video, the average 30-year fixed mortgage just hit 7.83%. That makes a monthly loan payment of $2,599.01, but that's just the beginning. Before we get to all the important overlooked items, I do hope you hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a few comments at the end. Okay, let's continue. Property taxes vary from state to state, but the effective tax rate averages around 1.1% according to the U.S. Census Bureau data. Keep in mind that in some states it's over 2%, but at 1.1%, that's $4,400 per year in property taxes. The national average for home insurance on a $400,000 home is approximately $2,863 per year. Assuming you don't need flood insurance, that's really expensive. On average, homeowners spend 1 to 2% on home maintenance and repairs each year. Let's go with the best case scenario again, and we'll use only 1%. That's still an average of $4,000 per year for repairs and maintenance that must be budgeted for. They don't happen every month, but when they do, they can be really costly, and you need to be ready so it doesn't cause you to fall further into debt. If we do not keep up with the general maintenance and repairs, you are likely to see the value of your home go down over the years. Since you didn't have a 20% down payment, you will be required to take out private mortgage insurance, or PMI. This varies greatly depending on your credit score, but assuming you have a really good score of 740 to 760 range, it would be approximately $123 per month or $1,476 per year. This expense can be terminated once you reach 20% equity in the home, which would take about 9.16 years for our example. So the total PMI would be $13,520. If someone has an FHA loan, they don't require a PMI, but those loans usually require an upfront mortgage insurance premium of 1.75% of the purchase price and an annual cost that varies with the borrower. Just the additional upfront cost would be $6,300. For our example, we are looking at a conventional loan though, so we'll use the PMI. Now we are leaving out other possible expenses such as HOA dues, which most people have. According to Quicken Loans, the average HOA dues run between $200 and $300 per month, but they can be much higher. Over 1 in 4 homes in the U.S. have HOA fees, and in recent years, over 60% of newly built single-family homes had HOA fees. If you were looking at a home that's under an HOA association, don't forget to include this expense. If you get behind on these, the association will slap a lien on your house, and if it continues, they may foreclose on your property. But even without these and other hidden expenses, we are now at $12,739 in total additional yearly expenses for the first 9.16 years, or that's $1,061.58 per month. Add that to our monthly loan payment, which was $2,599.01, and we now have a monthly obligation of $3,660.59. After 9.16 years, the PMI can be removed and our monthly obligation drops to $3,537.59. With the recent increase in home prices and the soaring interest rates, this is now the most unaffordable housing market since 1984. The standard threshold for what's considered unaffordable is total expenses over 30% of your household income. Thus, to deem that $3,537.59 in total monthly expenses affordable, someone should have around $11,792 in monthly income, or around $141,500 per year to buy this house. This is really the first kind of analysis that we should do to see what kind of price range of homes we can afford based on our income without creating a difficult financial burden for ourselves. But whether we can afford it or not is just the first step. Perhaps a more important question, is it a good investment, or should we rent and invest the savings? Or rent and save up more for a significant down payment while waiting for a better opportunity and lower interest rates? Okay, here's where things get a bit crazy to think about. By the time this load is paid off, the person would have paid over $575,000 in just interest expense alone on a $360,000 mortgage. And the other monthly expenses of $1,061 during the first 9.16 years and $938 after the PMI rolls off total to be $351,418 over these 30 years, assuming no increases in taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs due to inflation. That's a grand total of out-of-pocket pure unrecoverable expense of $927,000, or about $2,575 per month in just the first 30 years. Wait though, we're not quite done. What about the opportunity cost of the $48,000 we calculated for the closing costs and the down payment? $40,000 was invested into the home, and the $8,000 was just lost to pure expense. Since 1991, U.S. Homes has averaged a 4.4% compounded annual growth rate, according to the Federal Housing Finance Agency. During that same period of time, the S&P 500 averaged a compounded annual growth rate of 10.21% with the dividends it pays. So there's actually an opportunity cost associated with not making a better investment. Let's be conservative and assume the difference was only 5%. So the $40,000 could have been earning 5% more than it did by being invested into the home, resulting in a profit of $132,877. And the $8,000 could have been earning 10% over those 30 years, resulting in a balance of about $139,000. The two of these together give us an opportunity cost of $272,472. Adding this to the previous $927,063 in expenses, we arrive at a grand total of $1,199,536 in pure expenses over the 30-year loan period. None of this amount includes the principal payments towards the house or possible HOA fees. That averages to $39,984 per year or $3,330 per month in pure expenses. Now, let's take that $39,984 annual expense and divide it by the price of the home, which was $400,000. And we get approximately 10% as an annual cost of home ownership over the first 30 years. Before we learn how to use this to make real-life decisions, let's take a quick look at the first 8 years of ownership. In the first 8 years, most of your payment is going to interest. Just during the first 8 years, the person would have paid $216,000 in interest alone. Factor in the home insurance, property tax, home maintenance, and PMI insurance that we would have paid, and that's another $101,000 after 8 years. Now, if we calculate the opportunity cost as we did before on the $48,000 at closing, but just for 8 years, that's another $36,000. The complete out-of-pocket expense for the first 8 years of this home is now $354,441, or about $44,000 annually. If we divide this by the purchase price of the home, which was $400,000, we get 11.1% of annual cost of ownership. When making a decision about whether we want to buy or rent, the length of time we plan to stay in the home is very important. The average length of time that people stay in a home is around 13 years. But the longer we stay in the same home, the better investment it becomes. If the sale does take place, there's additional expenses. The typical realtor fees are 5 to 6%. Thus, if you sold a $400,000 home, it would cost you another $20,000 to $24,000 in fees. We haven't included any of these. Let's look at how we can use our calculated values. If you stay in the home for 8 years, we use the 11.1% calculation. Thus, let's say you have your eye on a $400,000 home to buy. You would take that amount times 11.1% for an annual expense of $44,400 or about $3,700 per month. So if you could rent a comparable home for less than $3,700, then the advantage goes to renting. If your plans are to live in a home much longer, we'll use the 10% of the $400,000, which is $40,000 in annual costs or $3,333 per month. Thus, if the cost of renting is below this figure for a comparable home, the advantage again goes towards renting. Clearly, with house prices and interest rates where they are, this is a very difficult time to view a home as a good investment. If you can find a comparable place to rent that is significantly lower, it's usually better to rent and be able to save and invest more for retirement. That, of course, requires the discipline to actually invest the difference rather than spend it on a bunch of stuff that we don't even need in life. Now, if the interest rates drop sometime in the years to come, that makes a huge difference. If the average interest rate was 6% rather than 7.83%, it would save $158,627 in interest charges over the life of the 30-year loan. Just this factor alone would lower the annual cost of ownership 1.3% from the 10% figure over the 30 years we calculated. That 1.3% savings on our home is $5,287 per year, or about $440 per month. So it's not surprising that in a recent Gallup poll, only 21% of people believe it's a good time to buy a home. And that's the lowest level since the poll was first conducted in 1978. And in California, that's an example of one of the worst states for home affordability. According to the California Association of Realtors, only 15% of households can afford to buy a home right now in California. Some people say that they will just bite the bullet and take on high-priced mortgage with current interest rates and then refinance later. However, this plan needs its own considerations. Remember in our example, the closing costs were $8,000, and that was below the national average. When you refinance, you will have these expenses again. Plus, when people refinance, many take out another 30-year mortgage to keep their payments low. This just causes them to pay way more in total interest charges again. There are times when it makes sense to refinance, but you must do the math and make sure you're not extending the loan beyond where the current loan ends. Ideally, you would want to try and shorten the remaining years on the existing loan. Also, with the possibility of wanting to refinance at a later date, it may not be a good idea to buy mortgage points. Mortgage points are fees you pay to the lender to reduce your interest rate. For every 1% of the mortgage amount, it typically reduces your interest rate by 1/4%. For our example of a $360,000 loan, buying 2 points would lower our interest rate 0.5%. But it would cost you $7,200 to do so. That would result in our monthly payment dropping by $123.61 per month. On the surface, it would seem that taking $7,200 by $123.61, this would pay for itself in about 58 months. However, if we had applied that $7,200 to the loan itself at closing, it would have lowered the payment by $51.98. So the actual savings is now that $123.61 minus $51.98, which is only $71.63. So now we take $7,200 divided by 71.55, and it would pay for itself in about 100.5 months. So it would take over 8 years to break even. Thus, if you feel you're going to own the home for less than 8 years or refinance within 8 years, you should not be buying points. It would be a money-losing investment. In fact, according to the National Association of Realtors, in a recent report, 23% of home buyers right now expect to stay in the home 5 years or less, and 42% expect to stay in the home under 10 years. Now, of course, the decision isn't just all about the numbers. There are other pros and cons of each. Let's run through them quickly. For renting, there's more flexibility and freedom with less responsibility. You have no maintenance or unexpected costly repairs. You're not tied down to a property, so you're free to relocate much easier. You don't have a lawn to take care of or trees to trim. Plus, your monthly expenses remains constant. And it may be cheaper, allowing you to invest more and create net worth for retirement. And some rental complexes have such additional amenities such as free gyms or a pool. However, the landlord could raise rent prices, and you can't make changes to the property, and pets may be a problem. For buying, sometimes there's a real psychological benefit of owning something that is yours. It can provide a sense of stability and pride. You can decorate, paint, renovate as you wish, and you have more privacy. It's also an investment. It may not be the best investment, but at least it's a forced savings plan. Since most people don't save and invest, at least this forces them to create some net worth. However, it does come with additional responsibility. Plus, insurance and property taxes can increase just like rent can. and other monthly expenses can vary greatly depending on what the house needs. If you have HOA fees, they can increase at any time also. If you are looking at buying, it's at least important to be an informed buyer and understand all the costs that go along with owning a home beyond just the mortgage. When we do an in-depth assessment, buying a home isn't always the investment many people think it is. Homes can be an effective way to accumulate additional wealth, but homes also fall into the category of being a non-working asset. This means that a home does not produce cash flow. They demand cash flow in the form of maintenance, repairs, taxes, insurance, and improvements. Thus, if a person nearing retirement has been too fixated on only trying to get their mortgage paid off and hasn't been saving enough in portfolio assets, they may eventually discover their home detracts from their finances, just as rent does. But they won't have any liquid assets to help with living expenses in retirement. It's currently a very difficult market, but I hope this video has given you some additional things to consider rather than the simplistic view most people start out with. Please hit the like button, leave some comments, and thank you for watching.